Hey everyone, Tom Del Beccaro. Happy New Year to all. Thank you for joining in on our first show of Politics in Perspective for the new year. I think we have a great show for you. Our special guest is John McLaughlin, who is Trump's pollster and a great strategist. I'm gonna talk about Minnesota and Venezuela, and our great producer, former Iranian citizen, who's also jailed there, is going to give us an update on Iran. I want to thank Ex American News for carrying this, worldviewtube.com for carrying it, AUN TV and others. This is going to be a big year for us. You got to join me on Substack if you can. There are my vital statistics. You can see at Thomas Del Beccaro for the Substack, Facebook, where I post a lot of stuff, Instagram, and my Twitter as well. And I really appreciate that you not only following the show, but helping me in those places. And of course, there are my books. It's a new year, but not a new narrative. I write my books so that they provide you with thoughts going forward by which you can judge current events. Speaking of current events, let's just go to my opening statement where the new year starts with a bang. And that includes the Maduro capture, but really focus on Minnesota. So there's two aspects of Minnesota now, of course. There is the ICE activity there that led to a shooting, and across, of course, the massive fraud. So let's start with the massive fraud because that's the background to everything. Let's talk about what it is the left does with immigration. So, step one, completely open borders, or virtually completely open borders that overwhelm the system. What do I mean by overwhelm the system? So many they let through that the judicial system and the law enforcement can't deal with it. So millions come in and we don't know where they are, including 300,000 children, of which the Trump administration is starting to recover. But all of these people come in and they settle in states, and then the left wants those people counted for census purposes to determine which states have electoral college votes. So that was part of their plan. But their plan was always to overwhelm the system and make it impossible for the judicial system to remove them. That was step one and part of the plan. Step two is if anyone tries to enforce the law, it's very simple law. If you're here illegally, you're subject to removal. They start these protests at every level. They protest the judicial actions, they protest the Department of Justice, and of course, ICE. And they make it as difficult as they can for any of these branches to do their basic job, which is to enforce the law that has been around for decades upon decades. And then they demonize ICE to paralyze ICE. That's their goal. So if you watch how that's represented in the news or these paid for protests, the entire goal for them is demonization. Now let's look at the Minnesota shooting, which of course is tragic. We want no deaths from simple law enforcement otherwise. But consider what they were doing here. This is a trained group. The woman who was shot was trained and had a leadership role. That entire day, she was, call it what you will, stalking, marking, obstructing. That's their goal, to stop ICE from doing something. And they ramp up the tension, they ramp up the risk, and they place officers at risk. They've been demonizing them for the entire Trump presidency. And then a tragic situation occurs. And then the next step after the tragedy is further demonization and the casting of this human being, regardless of who they were, the Maryland father and husband, who was a human trafficker and a gang member. But now this woman they're trying to make as angelic. And the reality is she wasn't angelic. By the way, she was a mother. She has 3 kids. How many of you mothers out there put yourself in harm's way when you have 3 kids? How many of you step on the gas of a car with the police with their hands inside your car? Who would do that? And then you have the mayor, who is a child. He's an activist, ramping up tensions, swearing, saying, get the F out. You have Tim Walz come on saying this shouldn't be prejudged. In the same news conference, he demonizes, saying that ICE is sowing chaos. And then he says that join us, whether you're in LA, Portland, Chicago. And of course, then something happens in Portland. So their goal is to get them all here and then make it impossible to remove them. And they ramp it up so much that tragedy occurs. Now, the mayor was forced to admit that the ICE officer who shot the woman was actually hit with the car because it's on video. So what did he say? He said he would have the same injury if he used his hip to close a refrigerator door. Oh, okay. This child activist mayor has decided he understands that. The important thing is that, in fact, he was hit with the car. And you ask yourself, if you're about to get hit by a car with someone who's disobeying the law and has been for hours, in your mind, are you positive she's only going to hit you a little bit? A refrigerator's worth? Do you know for sure? Of course not. And this wasn't murder. This was a tragedy that a 37-year-old mother would act this way when she has 3 kids. Sorry, I don't get in cars and step on the gas around police officers, especially when they have their hands in the car and standing in front of my car. I wouldn't even dream of such a thing. But that's their goal. Now, they're happy this occurred because they overwhelmed the system not only with people getting there illegally in Minnesota, but also committing fraud. And that's what big government does. All big governments have fraud because politicians appropriate, they don't follow up. Lord knows how large this is going to be, but Tim Walz is happy to have something to distract from it. Now let's go to Venezuela. President Trump picked up Nicolas Maduro in an amazing operation that even John Brennan had to admit was amazing. But here's the thing about it. The Democrats said it was illegal. Okay. If you have never read a history book, probably never read the Constitution, let alone Supreme Court cases, you might think it's illegal, but don't be so dumb. Thomas Jefferson sent ships to the Mediterranean to take on the Barbary pirates. There was no determination back then that it was illegal. Many presidents have done this. Obama, Libya, got rid of the Libyan ruler. What did Hillary say? We came, we saw, he died. You know why you haven't heard anything from Hillary recently, other than Epstein and Bill? Is because she knows that what she did was even more crazy, or was crazy, compared to what Trump did, which was enforce what they indicted him for, the Biden administration, and what Obama did with Hillary, saying he was a national security threat. So first national security threat, Biden indicts, Trump picks up. And yet the Democrats say it's unconstitutional and illegal. Why do they say that? Because they hate Trump and they've never read a history book. Don't fall for that. Or you could be as dumb as Tim Kaine in Virginia, who of course said we don't have any rights from God. Our founding documents said that, but he is unaware of it. And then he says is violation of the War Powers Act. What is the War Powers Act? Well, first of all, the stronger argument is the War Powers Act is illegal because it's not in the Constitution. It gave rights to Congress not in the Constitution, which restrain the president. But even if it was constitutional, the War Powers Act says after a use of force, within 48 hours, Congress needs to be noticed of what's going on. Well, what does that say? That takes it for granted that the president can act without asking Congress to act. But Tim Kaine's not smart enough for that. So don't you be misled either. This year is going to be an explosive year. It's the midterms. Democrats are out there saying Trump's not going to have an election. That's how they excite their base. And they lie to their base. And that's the state of the American Republic, the democratic system we're currently using. The Democrats, as we're going to talk with John McLaughlin about, lie to their base about this, what's going on, and that's how they get their votes. They allow them to commit fraud. They allow them to come across the border. That's what they're doing. In 2026, he started off with a bang, and I can't imagine it's going to calm down, and it's certainly not going to calm down after the midterms, because Gavin Newsom and the rest are going to declare for the presidency, and the hype and the craziness is only going to get worse. That's my opening statement. Thanks so much for joining us. Again, please join me at Substack, tomdell.com, politicalvanguard.com, which has the complete log of all our guests. And coming up next is John McLaughlin, Trump's pollster, and one of the best strategists in politics of the last 50 years. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. I wanted to launch this year with a special guest who truly is a difference maker. He's one of the most brilliant strategists on the Republican side to come along in decades. And I'm talking about John McLaughlin, who is not just a pollster. John, how are you? But is a brilliant strategist, has been so not just for President Trump, but also for the man running for governor in California. John, so glad you're here today. Thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the flattery, but I find you're only as good as the people you work for. So, and the American people, being a pollster, American people, they're always right. So hopefully we can keep steering them right. So I've been fortunate to work for a lot of good people that have made the pollster look good.
Yes, but many pollsters, especially in today's media, which we got to talk about because your latest work talks about the difference when people know the facts versus what they're told.
Right.
You find out what people are thinking. You find out, importantly, why they're thinking about that and what, importantly, can be done about that. So let's start with, you did a poll in December on where people are with President Trump, because the elections, the immediate off-year elections tend to go the other way. You point that out. We were told that the consumer is down on his luck, but that's not what happened in December. So let's start with your recent poll, if we can bring up that first slide.
Sure.
And this is your work saying how people feel about President Trump and his policies, whether they approve of it or not, and approve of him and his policies or just him. And what's essentially the findings you made?
Well, the media likes to ask just straight approve, disapprove of President Trump. This is the way we asked it in the Trump campaign. And also, we only poll likely voters. So if they tell us they're not going to vote, they're not in the samples. So we were very accurate for President Trump. We had him winning when other people said that that Harris was going to win, and she didn't win. We won the popular vote, but that slide that you showed, where President Trump had a 50% job approval and there was a 47 disapprove, that's the way we did in the campaign, because the key difference is the number of voters, the 14% that tell us that they like his policies, but they don't necessarily like his personality as much. But his policies win it because he gets results. He's a unique figure in American history in that he's a businessman. He's not a politician. He does things to get results versus doing things to enhance his personal popularity. But a lot of times these politicians, where they they may do things so that people like them, but they don't necessarily succeed in what they're doing. Trump's more success oriented, and with that number that you showed there, it's different than a lot of the media polls. By the way, just as a case and example, the Economist YouGov did a poll around this. There's lots of media polls that are more critical, but they poll adults. They don't poll registered voters. They don't poll likely voters. It was done at the same time as the poll that you're showing, and they had the president, his job approval only 39% and 56 disapproved. But they did a poll of, and this is typical of the media, 1,550 adult citizens. They could have been polling illegal immigrants. And when you go into the internals of their poll, they only have 34% Trump voters. We got 50% of the popular vote, and they have us at 34. So if you're modeling after the electorate, you shorted Donald Trump 16 points. So that's the difference between a lot of these media surveys and our survey, because they're doing it deliberately to run down the president. Just like the infamous Iowa poll, the Des Moines Register Iowa poll. They said we were losing Iowa right before the election, and we weren't. It was just ridiculous. And
So
mhm.
yeah, so this is where I like your work, because you don't stop with just what you see on the facade. You go below that.
Right.
And talk about what it is to change. And what you found in your polling, if we put the next slide up, is that if people find the truth about what's going on with the economy and otherwise,
Right.
they're willing to change. A huge portion of the electorate is, go ahead and put up the next slide if you would. A huge portion of the electorate is willing to change their view, even though they were lied to before. Please describe that dynamic.
And by the way, this is really important, because the Democrats are trying to run their campaigns based on affordability. Well, every Democrat in the House and the Senate voted for the largest tax increase in the history of America last year, when they voted to not pass or renew the Trump tax cuts, which was the president called the one big beautiful bill. If those tax cuts were not renewed, you would have had a $4.5 trillion tax increase would have gone into effect this January, and every American would be paying about $2,000 more in taxes than they are now. So what's interesting is they're trying to run down the economy. And by the way, the Republicans, I always say they need to play offense, where Republicans, we should have called out every Democrat. We should have them on record right now that they're fatally flawed when they talk about affordability if they want to raise your taxes, because after 4 years of Biden inflation, we shouldn't have that. But when we asked voters in our national survey of 1,000 likely voters who told us they're going to vote in this, they told us they're going to vote in this upcoming midterm election. When we told them, when we asked them, is the economy in recession or not? They're saying it's 51% we're not in recession, 42% say we are in recession. We also asked them, is the economy getting better or worse? And 37% are saying it's getting better, 56 are saying worse. What's amazing is the ones who say it's getting worse watch CNN, MSNBC, left of center news outlets, anti-Trump news outlets. The ones who say it's getting better, they're more likely to be watching conservative news like on Fox News, Newsmax, etc. But then we gave them a question where we told them that what the facts are with the economy, where if they knew that the economy was actually growing, the rate of inflation is lower than, say, the rate of jobs going. We gave them a series of facts about the economy. All of a sudden, they're telling us that they think the economy would be better 62 and 33. It's only 33% say it's getting worse. That is a huge turnaround. We've got you go from a minus 19 where they say the economy is getting worse to a plus 29. So you got a huge turnaround in public opinion because they're not getting the facts. And the article you put up first was written by a nonprofit, the Media Research Center, which is a nonprofit which sorts out what's true or not in the media. And they said once you get past the media misinformation, voters would think that the economy is getting better. But you really have what's going on what's really going on is the Democrats have weaponized the mainstream media, the legacy media, to keep the facts from getting out to the voters, so that what they want to do is they want to cost the Republicans the House and the Senate. They want us to lose the House, and they want us to lose the Senate, because that way they can contain Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump, what he's doing is he's really, I mean, we created a working class coalition for Donald Trump. That was a majority of the Americans in the last electorate, and what they want to do is they basically want to depress that coalition and take back the House so they can contain President Trump. They don't want the kind of reforms that he's making, whether it's with the economy, or whether it's tax cuts, or whether it's tariffs that promote America First policies over jobs leaving America. They certainly don't like what he's doing, to reassert American strength in the world. It's just, and they start, and lately what you're seeing is they want open borders. I mean, this is like crazy. They want to. No other country in the world has open borders where they allow people to come in the country, give them welfare, give them food stamps, give them free health care, and then, at the burden of middle class taxpayers in America, they basically want to subsidize an open society where literally it would destroy the country, and they're doing it on purpose. So this is what the Democrat Party stands for, and the Republicans have got to play offense. We can't go
Okay,
back to borders.
so your work shows not just what some would like us to believe on the surface. You ask a deeper question, you get better answers. You point out, as you know, I wrote over my shoulders the book, The Divided Era, about how divided we are as a country in these camps, but the media is in those two different camps. Mm-hmm. And you point out that the left's media is really weaponized for the Democrats. Mm-hmm. So then you take the next logical step, which is to reaffirm how Trump got elected in the first place, which is mm-hmm. to go around them. And if we put up the next slide, John, for you to take a look at, you wrote this piece. Yep. Explain to us what you mean by that.
Well, that's precisely what I mean is, it's very simple that when you look, and by the way, all this is on our website, McLaughlinonline.com. So you can go and see this. This is a Newsmax blog that we put up based on the last national poll that we did right before Christmas. And what we mean is, when you look at the voters who get their news and information from left of center media channels versus those that get it from right of center, or the 30% that don't pay attention to anything and go into entertainment. When you look at that, the misinformation is what's holding President Trump's job approval down. It affects the generic ballot for Congress, because we went in, you'll see line graphs on there. The generic ballot for Congress, we were leading in the early part of the year by a few points. But now in the last two surveys we had, the Democrats are ahead by a point generically, which it's different district by district, but the generic vote really sets a tone where we have a history of that it does match up with the popular vote for Congress. So now when you've got such a narrow margin in the House, where the Republicans, with the passing of the late congressman in California, and Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation, where they're going to have a special election for that, you've got only 218 Republicans to like 212 Democrats. There's no margin for error in terms of votes in the Congress. And when you go into the November election, if we don't get the generic vote higher to do what the last time it was done with 2002, and we had worked for, at the time I worked for the RNC chairman, Jim Gilmore, the Speaker of the House, Denny Hastert, the chairman of the NRCC then was Tom Davis. We were in 2002, and we also ended up working for George W. Bush's reelection. But in 2002, we had a growing economy. You had a tax cut. George W. Bush had put more money into the economy after 9/11 to make sure we didn't go into recession. So Donald Trump's tax cuts, as they're working, we have the chance to do what we did in 2002, where we actually picked up 8 House seats and 2 Senate seats in a midterm election and defied the usual midterm jinx that the party in power in the White House has. So the conditions are there and the environment's there, but what we need is the Republicans who are running for Congress and Senate to play offense against the Democrats and make affordability, meaning if the 4 years of Biden's inflation, you don't want to have pay higher taxes because all the Democrats want you to pay higher taxes. Affordability should be our issue. And also crime safety should be our issue. National defense should be our issue. Security should be our issue. Education reform should be our issue. And healthcare reform should be our issue. We just have to listen to the Democrats.
The key to me, and we talked about this when you and I were on with the Steve Moore show not that long ago,
right?
And especially in the midterms, there is a tendency of the party in the White House not to be on the offensive during the midterms, to say we won, here's what we did. But elections are always about what are you going to do for me tomorrow? I don't care how much you did for me yesterday. And you also believe there should be a specific emphasis. If we put up the next slide, President Trump is doing a lot in foreign policy, but and that's because presidents tend to like that because they have substantial power and the other party can't really stop them. But domestic issues, that's the thing. Go ahead and put up the next slide if you would as well. Most important, and you have the economy. The economy's stupid, and socialists is below that, security's below that. So you want, if you could explain, emphasis on these domestic issues.
Well, it's just a graph that reinforces what everybody knows is the 42% that's the plurality of voters that are leading there is telling us that economic issues matter most, of which 21% are saying that it's cost of living and inflation. That's in that 42. And then you have below it, you have 3 out of 10 voters are telling us it's social issues like protecting Social Security, Medicare, healthcare, education, etc. And then you can see that line on the bottom, the green line dropping, are security issues, which was mainly driven by border. So Republicans, in a way, are becoming victims of their own success as the border becomes more secure and immigration is more secure. That's less of a priority. But they're focused domestically. That question was, what's the most important issue that decide your vote in the next election? So it's the top set of issues have to do with economics. The security cluster that tends more towards the Republican, and the social issue cluster tends to favor the Democrats. So the middle ground is actually making sure we win on those domestic economic issues, and that's where the focus has to be. And it's not about this is what we're doing for you or this is what we've done for you. It's about what are you going to get done for me that helps my life in the future. So you're exactly right that thanks for what you did for me in the past, but what are you going to do for me tomorrow is what the election is about. So the Republicans, we definitely, and by the way, it's a clear path. You can we can win on every one of those issues. Donald Trump, when he was great in the last election, he had a platform that the Republicans laid out very clearly in Milwaukee. That was his platform that the majority of Americans agreed with on every one of the issues in the 17 pages that they published, et cetera, whether it was lowering taxes, growing the economy, creating jobs, securing the border, making our defenses stronger, et cetera. But there was also good important components about healthcare reform, and which included transparency, which included letting consumers choose more of their healthcare, and and also on education reform too, about going back to basics on education. But what's important for the Republicans, if you're running for Congress, you're running for Senate, you would have a scorecard with your positions on those issues versus your opponents. And the majority of Americans will agree with it. By the way, President Trump's proposing that they have a midterm convention. I
Yeah,
hope,
yes, that's what I was going to bring that up next.
yeah,
If you could just let me interrupt you for a second here, because we had many this dynamic of, oh, the party in the White House usually loses the next midterms, and I for years have said that we write about what happened in elections, but we don't often enough write about what didn't happen in the election, which had an impact.
hmm
And for me, you remember when Bill Frist was
yeah,
Senate leader,
hmm
and Iraq was the Iraq War, which really wasn't that impactful to the United States, but the Republicans weren't saying anything. And to me, the party in the White House doesn't really run a campaign for the midterms. They do this individual, each candidate should do what they want. But we're all national now. I wrote a piece in Newsmax that all elections are not, the opposite sort of what the line was, all elections are local. Not true anymore, because the national stage is so overwhelming. So you and I find a voice in you bigger than mine where you say, no, we're going to be dynamic and on the offensive. And so you have a path forward and a convention, and you want them to stand for something and run on something.
right. And it's like we do a lot of work with former Speaker Gingrich and his new American New Majority Project, and that was very. By the way, he was very Speaker Gingrich was very helpful as an advisor to President Trump, where with the platform, and Newt's claim to fame was historically, winning the majority for the Republicans, but he had those Republican members sign on to the Contract for America, which those of us who are old timers, we actually polled for them, and the components of the Contract for America, we were one of the pollsters that got to contribute to that. Were overwhelmingly popular because Newt's ideas, his policies were very, very popular, and they won the majority. Clinton had failed in a lot of respects. Uh, but going and that was, we redid that with President Trump with the Republican platform last year, and now, or 2 years ago, and now, if we have this midterm convention, Republicans would get to do the same thing. But it's the idea of playing offense and going into the, are you for health savings accounts so that consumers would have their own choice of they pick their doctor, they could save some money, et cetera. It's a complex thing. They'd have transparency where hospitals and doctors would have to publish what their rates are so that before you choose what's going on. You could and help you choose your doctor. But the Democrats, what do they stand for? They stand for Medicare for all. You know what Medicare for all is? It's a euphemism for government-run healthcare, which lead to rationing, and you wouldn't get services. These countries that have government-run healthcare, like Canada. If you're a wealthy Canadian or even a middle-class Canadian, where do you go for healthcare? When you get cancer, you go over the border to the Cleveland Clinic. You have a heart operation, you go over the border to Cleveland. Sometimes they fly to Florida or California, but or Buffalo. They go to the hospital because if they stay in Canada and wait, they won't get the services they need. Well, why aren't we challenge the Democrats on that? I mean, right now there's this, this healthcare tax credits they're fighting over because a lot of working class voters who don't want to be on Medicaid, who don't want to, whose employers don't provide them health care, they're working 2 or 3 jobs and they got to buy their own health care. They're being forced into the Obamacare exchanges, and they need those tax credits to pay the premiums because there's no cost controls on the health insurance companies because there's no consumer control, there's no transparency. Well, let's have that debate where a Democrat wants government-run health care versus, allowing you to choose your own health insurance, buy the best plan. And if you need government assistance to buy that, we'll help you. But at the same time, let's work on some healthcare reforms that we don't have a healthcare system that's going to drive the federal budget broke. So
Yeah,
I think we ought to
yeah,
have these debates.
yeah. In years past, I've written about reminding Republicans what happened when during the Bush v. Gore, there was a tax bill, and
Mhm.
they had the in midsummer, and all the Democrats were on record against it, but the Republicans were on record for it. Now they knew when they were doing this, the Democrats were going to knock it down,
Right,
but that defines the election.
right,
Whereas most of the time in the midterms, they don't do something like this. So the Republicans, you're in politics, I'm sure you agree with me, you either are defining the other side or being defined by them.
right.
And we don't do the defining, and that's what you want to see. If we can bring up the next slide here, your path forwards, and you're talking about a proven formula. So please turn out Trump voters. We keep hearing that Trump voters aren't coming out. Well, Trump's more popular than the Republicans in Congress, in my view, because the voters don't view them as standing up like you would like them to. Could you comment on that?
Right, because typically in the midterms you have a lower turnout. So in the last presidential election, 156 million voters came out, and Trump got 77 million votes, and Harris got 75 million votes nationally. In the midterm in 2018, you had 118 million voters. In the midterm in 2022, you had 112 million voters. If we can get out more Trump voters, which there are, than Harris voters, uh, then we win. But in 2025, you saw in Virginia and in New Jersey as classic examples, Trump got, even though he lost those states, and by the way, if Biden had been the nominee, there would have been more in play. But we didn't even try, and Trump came close, did better in both those states. But we had 2 million votes for Donald Trump. The Republican candidates for governor only got 1.4 million votes. And so you had 600,000 less Trump voters come out. They were there. They just weren't motivated. They weren't excited to come out. And the third part is when you look at there's a Blakeman model. A lot of Americans don't know who he is yet, but Bruce Blakeman is the Nassau County executive. Nassau County, right next to New York City. Uh, it's bigger than 8 states. It's an 8-point Democrat county. Blakeman went after the Democrats there because they were for cashless bail, which in New York is a scourge that we've got, where they literally let criminals out of jail. Now you have, both Kathy Hochul, who supports that, as well as the mayor of New York City, Mondami. Uh, so we went after them hard on cashless bail and crime. Nassau County is the safest county in America. They cooperate with ICE. They've helped put 2 million criminal legal aliens in their jails so that they can deport them. Uh, but they also cut taxes, and which would be music to our friend Steve Moore's ears. He cut a $150 million a Democrat tax increase, $150 million, killed it right off the bat. Didn't raise taxes, sales of property in 4 years, and he went after the Democrats who were wanting to raise taxes. So you've got this, crime fighting, tax fighting Republican who's now going to take on Kathy Hochul, because when Elise Stefanik left the race, Bruce Blakeman will be the Republican conservative nominee in the state, and she is vulnerable. Less than half the voters like her. The majority of voters want someone new. As they get to know Bruce Blakeman, by the way, Blakeman won among not just Republicans overwhelmingly. He won the independents. He won independent women. He won among Hispanics. He won among Asian Americans in the county, Chinese, Indian voters, uh, Korean voters. He won with younger voters, and now when you've got a Mondami in New York City has a tenant advocate, czar, who her first statement is to say that, you know we're going to change the relationship between homeowners and the government, where, especially if you happen to be white or something like that, she made these outrageous comments that private property doesn't mean anything to them. Blakeman's proposing that we ought to put an amendment in our state constitution to guarantee the right to own private property for citizens. Because if you get Democrat socialists, who these big government socialists like Mondami, they might just try to render your property their property. I mean, they really talk about collectivism. Collectivism is communism. In the 20th century, that was a really bad idea when the Soviet Union existed and it collapsed. And now you're seeing a collapse of collectivism in Venezuela, in Cuba, and certainly, other parts of the world. We don't want to go back to that, and China's even having its own problems. So, we need to play offense against these Democrats. If they want to defend their right to take your property, we want to have the Republican Party say, no way, you have the right to private property. To, in America, we have opportunities. You work hard. And that's what, by the way, Donald Trump's, our friend Steve Moore helped with tax cuts with Larry Kudlow with President Trump. And you now have January, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, tax credits for senior citizens on Social Security. You know what that does? That encourages people to work, to build wealth, to gain. That's why the GDP in America is now, the growth of the GDP, the gross domestic product, is now higher than the rate of inflation. So the only way to get out of inflation is to grow out of inflation. These Democrats want to go back to the good old days of Biden inflation, no growth economies, higher taxes, and we ought to let's have the fight. Let's have the debate. That's the way we have the Senate.
I agree. If Americans only knew what government was doing to them and what the Democrats want to do to them, I've always said that. Okay, we're running out of time, but I'm not. You're not allowed to leave until you talk about. I have a huge following in California, and so we're going to bring up this slide. Gavin Newsom, who is only, you have a huge blue state here. His approval rating toggles between 45 and 50. Tell us what you find.
By the way, that's nationally. He actually got better in his numbers. His payrolls went up because of the Democrats, because he fought Trump on redistricting in California. But let me tell you, I worked for Arnold in his first race in the recall election. I remember the first poll we got as soon as Arnold announced. We did a poll, and he and Bustamante were tied at 25. McClintock was at like 14. He had like over 100 candidates with the rest. And I said to Arnold, I said, I usually work for a guy like McClintock, but I know how to win this race. And you need to. He needed to go after Gray Davis, because that was the reason why they failed. Remember, Gray Davis had like a 62 unfavorable in that, and you had 55% voting yes on recall. So, but Gray Davis's flaws were you were having blackouts, you had high taxes, you had all sorts of problems in California. And Arnold went and played offense against Gray Davis. He went after those bad failed policies, and he promised to do better, and he, ultimately he ended up getting reelected because he did better. But you're looking at Gavin Newsom and the Democrats. It's a long way between now and their nomination, but nationally, Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris is still there, and the Democrat primaries are going to anchor back in on South Carolina and the Super Tuesday races, where the African American vote is really important, because in the Democrat primary, the African Americans are the majority in South Carolina, a lot of the Super Tuesday states in the South. So I'm not sure Kamala Harris is gone from the running again. I think she may have a shot at giving Gavin Newsom.
Okay, so John,
but
I'm going to bet you a steak dinner. My bet is that Kamala Harris doesn't. I was the first nationally to say she would not enter Iowa, because she was fourth in the poll in California. And if she was strong in California, they would have to have respect her because of all those delegates. But she was so weak there, she got no respect.
Yeah.
I don't think she runs, but I think Gavin's peaked too early. And so we're going to have you back towards maybe in the middle of the year and do an update on him, but also on the election. We got to run now, but folks, John, tell them where they can find you, your work.
you go to our website, McLaughlinonline.com. That's McLaughlinonline.com. The polls that we talked about that we did are on that website. And thank you for the opportunity, because Tom, it's like this is how we get our message out, because don't watch the mainstream media. Have people come to your podcasts, your websites, and we will that's the way we get the truth and the facts out. So that's the way we
Yeah,
want to
and
get voters.
I like your work because offense is the best defense.
Yeah.
Define them. Don't Republicans get defined. And we need people like you out there convincing candidates that no, you define them because you have the winning position. Don't be afraid.
Yep.
And that's what leadership's about in many ways. We got to run. I appreciate you being here. We'll be back in Politics in Perspective.
Thank you, Tom.
I hope you enjoyed that. Welcome back to Politics in Perspective. Please go to my Substack account. John McLaughlin's the best. He wins. And he doesn't sit back and hope to win. He's got a plan. And freedom needs a plan constantly. Let's talk about plans, because Iran is in the news, and every minute of every day, the news is changing. We see buildings, government buildings burning, and the like. And so I want to bring in my producer, who is from Iran, was jailed in Iran for not being Shiite enough, I guess you could say. Annie, please welcome back.
Thank you for having me back. That was very accurate. Yes, not being Muslim enough can get you in jail.
So the news is changing rapidly. There was the fire in Tehran at I believe you said it was the tax office. This seems different than in years past. What do you think?
It most certainly does. It looks like, if you look at the history of uprisings from 1979 to today, this one looks like the final stage. You see the progress, you see the coordination, organization. People are way more aware of what they're doing. There are plans. And most importantly, this time, they actually have a leader. I'm not necessarily saying the next government of the country, no, but the revolution itself has a leader, which is Crown Prince Pahlavi, who is leading people, giving them call to action, telling them what's the next step. So that's the biggest difference from this time versus any other time.
Well, also, it seems to me that the number of people participating, the number of cities where there are these protests has increased. Am I accurate in that?
You are, if we look at the uprising of last 10 years. However, we're still few cities away short from the Green Movement of 2009. In 2009 Green Movement, which was the election fraud uprising in Iran against Ahmadinejad, we had 517 cities involved. As of right now, we have 412 cities involved. But the crowd is bigger. Though the cities are less, but the crowd is much bigger. The Thursday night crowd was estimated of millions in 335 cities.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so every minute counts. By the time we're done with this conversation, the facts will have changed, but you believe the next 2 to 3, 4 days are critical. Please tell us why.
Absolutely, yes. So, number one, the reason I think next 72 hours are very crucial is Islamic Republic of Iran has done what they always do. They have turned the country into an absolute isolated nation. There is blackout, and I mean literally they have shut down electricity in certain areas. They have completely shut down internet. They have completely shut down cell services and landlines. The last time, unfortunately, we saw this was during 2019 uprising, where in 1 week the regime managed to massacre and kill over 1,800 innocent Iranians. So, since we're going through this time having a leader, Crown Prince Pahlavi, putting a tweet out calling on President Trump to possibly help with some sort of military action. Elon Musk is trying to boost Starlink because they killed the signal in Iran. So he's working on that. When we come back to light, figure of speech, when this blackout is over, we might see a different result. Instead of seeing just a massacre of Iranian killed, we might actually see some of the regime members escaping Iran, getting out of Iran, not being there anymore. I'm not necessarily saying the supreme leader, I'm saying some of the leaders. Also, the next call to action from Prince Pahlavi is coming up in 2 days. Depending on what that might be, Iranian might do something dramatic we've never seen in last 47 years.
Okay. For the average American, this is completely, pardon the pun, foreign. How does it go from all these people in the street, from all of their angst, to somehow a change in government? Can't they just wait this out? What are your thoughts?
So at this point, no, they cannot wait it out, because the Iranian people aren't asking for resignation of one individual. They're not asking for a new supreme leader so they could wait it out or wait until next election. They're completely wanting this entire regime gone. How we go from here to the regime, there are 3 possible scenarios. One is what most Westerners are familiar with: color revolution. Some Western country gets involved, goes in, take out the leader, and then there's chaos, and they put someone in place as a transitional government, and we go from there. We've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in many places. Second possibility, the regime might feel enough pressure to have to escape. They will leave. Bad news with second scenario: if Khamenei leaves, he's going to give the power to IRGC, which then becomes a coup d'etat, which then people who are empty-handed have bare minimum possibility of fighting back. The third possibility is when, don't ask me how because I can't answer that on air, when enough of Iranians who are trained and armed come to the streets. We do have plenty of Iranians who are armed and they are trained. These are the 3 possibilities. That's why next 72 hours will dictate, is any of these 3 going, is President Trump going to answer Prince Pahlavi and come in? Is the regime going to run and give power to IRGC? Remember, during 12 days war, Israel and Iran, Khamenei went to his bunker and handed over power to IRGC. It has happened as early as 6 months ago, so that might be the possibility. It's one of those times, we have to wait it out and see what happens inside Iran. But I've been saying it for days, I'll keep saying it. Pray for people of Iran and those involved, because every single individual's action, from America to Israel to Prince Pahlavi to the Munster Supreme Leader, their actions are going to dictate the next hour of Iran.
All right. We'll certainly be watching. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this episode. Please share this. You can catch us Rumble. You can catch us YouTube, obviously, X America News, AUNTV, View2.com. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back next week where my guest will be Steve Forbes to talk about the American economy in 2026. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.